everybody, my name's Dan and I'm building this 73 Camaro in my garage by myself. I'm doing an LS swap, partnered with a 4L60E, and I've been lucky enough to be partnered with Holley Performance, Detroit Speed, Monster Transmissions, Anvil Auto, 74 Auto, which is where I got the engine and transmission from. I mean, it just keeps going on and on. We have a really good team working with us, kind of showing you guys the process. That looks better. Kind of showing you guys the process of what it takes to swap an LS, especially if you're gonna do it by yourself in your garage, which is something that not a lot of people want to tackle. Or if they do want to tackle it, they often find themselves in way over their head and have somebody else do the build. My goal is to show you guys that it can be done if you have patience and do enough research, and I hope to help you guys find some parts along the way. That being said, we gotta put everything back together, do a test fire, and hope everything runs good. And boy, do I hope it runs good. But enough of all that talking and jibber jabbering, let's get straight to it. So I've pulled my motor mounts out, and then I've got my transmission just kind of jacked up here. So I've got a rubber spacing that needs to go in between here and here. We're gonna take this out and then pop that motor mount in, that transmission mount in. It's just a rubber mounted transmission mount. Sits on the bottom of the transmission like this. One of these bolts, holes, go through the bottom of that Crossmember here. Although I'm not quite sure it's gonna line up. I think I might have to, well, that might be the right way. I guess we'll see, won't we? Next I'm gonna do my exhaust, my headers. Here, all this crap. We got our new gaskets, gonna put them on the exhaust, yeah. Now it's time to tackle the part that I've been not looking forward to, the wiring, because it's a lot. I'm not good at this. This is something, I can turn a wrench all day long, but this is something I'm not good at. Fuck. There's so much stuff, I don't even know where to begin. I'm just gonna start plugging stuff in. So on all the injectors, they're labeled injector 1, injector 3, 5, and then this one should be 7. 1, 3, 5, 7. If you're facing the front of the vehicle, 1, 3, 5, 7. I'm not doing an excellent job of recording absolutely everything, because a lot of this stuff is actually pretty simple. The instructions are excellent. So you got your injectors all the way across. I'm having a little issues getting them 100% seated on this one, but the rest of them feel really good. It's just this particular one that I'm not stoked on. And then obviously it tells you the ignition odd number of cylinders, 1, 3, 5, 7. This one says ignition even, so 2, 4, 6, 8. That's very simple. We've got an oil plug, it says oil on it. That's where the transducers come into play. The transducer plugs right into here, but your oil sensor's back here. Mine's actually broken anyway, which is convenient. So we'll take this off using one of our oil pressure sensor sockets. You know, I bought a couple of these when I was pulling out the old oil pressure sensor unit from the small block. So that's super convenient that it came with the transducer too, because this one was busted and I would have had to replace it anyway. Pop the old one out. Oh, actually that's a different fitting. Shit fuck. But our cam sensor does plug in back hither. That is good. This ain't good. and then we can connect to cylinder head only, which is a ground. We'll just throw it back here in the cylinder head. How about that? Got the ground done. All of these are wired up. The starter oil, we won't plug that in just yet. Map sensor's plugged in back here. Just so I know, this is the ECU. So now that I got oil in the engine, it is time to move on to the transmission, which has these little transmission lines here. You've got your, this is your sending line, so the bottom line on the 4L60Es, I don't know if it's the same for any other transmissions, but the bottom line on the 4L60E on the passenger side is your sending line, so this is going to run towards the front of the engine, go into the oil cooler, and then the line will come back, the return line, or the cool side will come back here, and then that's that. That'll be a closed system. We got to fix that before we put any fluid in the transmission. All right, let's see what our, just a bare bones transmission cooler here. This will act as a good placeholder in the meantime. All right, so what I also did is I went down to my local auto parts store and just picked up a transmission line kit for a different vehicle that shared similar transmission lines. Kind of cut them to just fit hoses over. This will work as a temporary setup just to kind of get the transmission cooler established in the car. So basically all I do is take a transmission line kit from another car, cut them, and then I'm gonna fit the hose over them and clamp them down really tight. And that'll give us a good temporary line in the meantime until the parts that I order get here. And they'll just kind of go where they need to go. We got our transmission cooler just kind of temporarily hooked up. Normally your transmission lines are gonna run to your radiator as well. Actually, I'm a little bit concerned that these transmission lines, they don't feel very seated in there. So I guess we'll see how they do. They might leak, but normally these are gonna run to your radiator, and then you can use an oil cooler on top of your radiator. But since I'm not hooking up my radiator, I'm not even put coolant in it right this second, because I'd like to do an initial test fire before I just assemble everything and put coolant in it. And the engine is fine to run without coolant in it for a little bit, very little, not very long. So keep that in mind. But I would like to just pour the transmission fluid. I'm gonna add 4 quarts now, and that should be fine just for the initial startup and in test, and then I'll shut it off and add more if needed. But I'll throw about 4 quarts in through the dipstick holder, which is down here, and then plug it back up. I got a plug, so. Hey, can't help but notice that the transmission is not in the car, even though it totally left inside the car last time. Well, that's because I'm pretty sure at this point, I'm not positive, but I'm pretty sure that I didn't seat the torque converter correctly, which this is a new thing for me. It's a new experience, so you know, forgive me for not getting everything 100% right, but you guys can watch a video on this. I'm not gonna do a good job of explaining it, but basically you have to make sure that the torque converter on this particular transmission, at least anyway, is all the way seated. So you put it on, you kind of spin it, and you put it on again, and I didn't really do that, and what ended up happening, I'm pretty sure anyway, is that the torque converter wasn't seated all the way, pressed up against it, and destroyed my pump, which is like a really common thing to do apparently if you're dumb like me. So learn from my mistakes and don't do that. So now what I have to do is I have to go into the transmission here and remove the transmission pump. I disconnect this little clip here, and then I got to pull out one of these retainer clips, and then I can pop this thing out as well. So I have to do that. Right, the retaining clip is out. We can pull out this little sensor here as well. I'll set that in there for right now. Also need to remove the O-ring. This is your lockup O-ring here. The trick to getting off O-rings like this is kind of like squeeze around the end. Squeeze with one hand, pinch, and then roll. And there you go. Apparently it'll be a pain in the ass to get this whole pump off. That's what this is, your whole front pump for your transmission. Apparently it's a pain in the ass to get off without this O-ring. Set it to the side in case my new one don't come with one. And now this should be ready to take off. Now you can either use a pump puller, or there's a position on the inside of the bell housing that you can pry from the back and push it out. You have to do this carefully. So there's a shop about an hour away from me that has a pump with my name on it already ready to go. I'm gonna bring this one to them and bring the new one home. And $120 later, $170 actually, we have a new transmission pump. Gotta put the seal on though. But yeah, open up the old one and that thing was totally boned. My bad, lesson to learn. Now it's time to properly install the torque converter. My O-ring. I almost forgot my O-ring. There we go. O-ring's on now. Now I'm gonna put this bad boy on. Now, I guess the rule that everyone uses is like the 3 clunk method, wait for it to clink 3 times. I watched a YouTube video on it, the source of all info, and they say that you want to be able to measure an inch between your mounting plate, which are these, for your flex plate, little mounting areas, and your bell housing. So essentially there needs to be about an inch deep between your bell housing. You're gonna use a straight bar, I'll show you in a second, but just rotate it and push in. I don't think that's an inch though. Well, that might actually be more than an inch. Look at that. We are perfectly just over an inch. So we're good. She is installed. Oh yeah, listen to that thing. Look at that thing spinning out. That fixed our problem. Before it wouldn't spin fully seated like this. So that is really good. Now we gotta put it back in the car. Again, well, the subframe anyway. 6 hours later, transmission's back in. And properly. Okay. Ready? This is it. Triggers, fingers crossed. Make sure there's nothing. before we get any further, I want to talk to you guys about the wiring situation that I have here. It's very ghetto, it's very temporary. I need you to hold on to that thought. Thing is, I found out something after I started up my engine. I thought it was running a little rough. I figured it was just low fuel pressure, but I didn't notice this. So the wiring is very straightforward. It's actually very simple. This was the part that made me the most nervous, and I gotta say that I'm super glad Holley makes this super easy with their Terminator X EFI kit. So before I start going into the wiring, I want to show you what mistake I made. You'll see what I'm talking about. So essentially you have your injectors that go here, 1, 2, 3, 4, or cylinders 1, 3, 5, and 7, and then you've got 2, 4, 6, 8. Obviously, those are your injectors, and then you have your coils here as well. These are what fire your plugs, your spark plugs. You have one for your odd ignition right here. It says odd ignition, so for your odd side, 1, 3, 5, 7, and you also have for your even. You have a ground for each ignition coil set. I didn't know that there was one for each. I just have them grounded to the back of the cylinder head here on both sides, but I originally only had the left side. I assumed that it was just one harness and had one ground. Made sense, but it's actually 2 harnesses and they each have their own ground strap for the ignition coils. 2 sets of grounds, and that's where I messed up before, and now this thing runs like a completely different machine. We'll just take a quick look at my temporary setup here. I've got my fuel pressure regulator. This thing is leaking a little bit. I'm missing the correct fittings. This is just a temporary setup to make sure I'm still having fuel pressure issues. I don't think it's related to that though. And here is your little display. This is basically what's going to tell you everything. Now that I have all of the ignition coils ground, hear that fuel pump priming, which is what I thought my problem was before. Fuel pump works fine, but I am still showing bad fuel pressure. I don't know why. So I'm gonna mess with this in a little bit. But you should really listen to this thing start. Now I've got the starter hooked up to a trigger pull. So essentially this, by pushing this button, connects the 2 points on the starter together, bridges them the same way you would a screwdriver, except you're farther away from the engine. Good, all 4 of those cylinders are going. What about, yep. Huh, hot. This cylinder is not running. We're good there. All the injectors seem to be working. All the cylinders are now firing. This one wasn't firing before, and I think that my ignition coil wasn't plugged in all the way to my spark plug, and plugged that in. Now they're all banging now. So now she's running really good. Now, that means we gotta throw everything back together and put this shit back on the body. That's what I'm gonna do today. I'll put this back in there, and then we'll start actually doing our wiring. Now, before I clean this place up and start putting everything back together, I'm gonna kind of go over the wiring with you guys. There was no point in doing the wiring on video. It wasn't boring, and it took several days of making sure I got everything right, so it just wasn't worth recording. Everything is super plug and play and pretty much self-explanatory. You got everything's listed, like your mat sensor. This basically goes right in front of your intake. You got your fuel rails here. All right, let's talk about the wiring. It's really almost not worth even talking about because it's pretty much my biggest issue right now is fuel pressure. I'm getting really low fuel pressure. So I'm gonna disconnect all these lines and start kind of putting everything back where it needs to be, and then we'll go from there. Another thing to note is that my brake booster is pretty much shot. All the lines are rotted, and so I'm gonna replace it because this brake booster is old and nasty and worn out. All the bolts on it are basically shot as well. This one little fucking bolt. All right, so now it's time to mate the body with the subframe. Buddies over at Detroit Speed to hook me up with the new brake booster. That's what you guys just saw me put on. And then also I've got some body bushings. These are all new body bushings. So for instance, here's your old clapped out one, and here's your new one. Boom, like that. This replaces this. This is basically what all the body bushings look like on this car. Completely rotten, completely nasty. If you're gonna do any sort of restoration, this is probably a good thing to do. And then here is the bolts that hold the entire subframe on to the car. I don't know if you guys have a good look at that, but I mean, look how warped this end is. I don't know if that's just from the torque or if that's just from being eaten away over time, or both, probably. Here's the new ones that Detroit Speed makes, and these are excellent. So new body bushings, new body mounts. This thing's gonna be really nice. Now let's talk about this part real quick when it comes to putting the body back on the subframe. I'm not really sure what the best way to go about doing this is, so please do not use this as an example. However, this was actually relatively easy. What I ended up doing was separating the body and the subframe and then lifting the body, keeping it in place. If I needed it to move around, I had it on wheel chocks on the back, but for the most part, they stayed pretty static. This allowed me to put dollies on the backside of the subframe, and it allowed me to roll it around and position it however I wanted. I then jacked it up to become level and then lowered the body on top of it while putting jack stands underneath the subframe. I got it lined up as close as I could before lowering it, and the body did lower into place pretty easily. However, it wasn't perfectly lined up for the holes, which it has to be. On the underside of the subframe, there are actually two holes that are separate from the bolt holes that are designed for you to put a screwdriver in and pry until the holes are lined up. It seems kind of like janky engineering, but it totally worked for the 70s, and honestly, it works now. I'd say altogether I spent probably about an hour getting the holes lined up and making sure all 4 bolts were started without cross-threading and whatnot, and then lowering it back on, and it can totally be done with just one person if you have the willpower and strength and really just don't care about yourself, I guess. Did have to crack out the welder at one point. That cage that holds in the square nut came undone, so I welded that back down and was able to start it. All right, so pardon my audio if it's a little weird. My camera's been having some audio issues, but now it is time for me to remove the dash because I can start putting wires through here, and I gotta kind of know where everything needs to go. There's nothing on here that's really important to me anyway, and I plan on making a custom dashboard when it comes down to it. I guess the next step is gonna be to rip everything out of here, minus the steering wheel, which I put in. I'm glad to be doing this car right. These are just drywall screws. Pretty much the whole thing was held together with drywall screws. Which is incredibly simple. There's a lot more room in this car than I thought there was. Yeah, it's not as bad as I thought it was gonna be. It's not great though, you know? But it doesn't look like it's in too bad a shape. Oh dude, that's snake skin. Cool, there was a snake in here at one point. I did find a rat. I don't know if I told you guys that, but I found a rat in this little air box down here. It'd been dead for a while. I mean, it was literally just a little bit of fuzz, but mostly bone. And then here's the mono speaker that this bad boy came with. Right here, one little speaker. This thing is blown out. Solid, like a solid 50 watt, you know? Cool thing is, it looks like that building my own custom dash, there's plenty to work with in here. I think for simplicity's sake, I'll have it just kind of come out here a little bit and then pretty much just be flat. Nice little radio right here, like a big 16:9 radio. That'll do that. I'll do an aftermarket dashboard or something like that. I'm not sure. I haven't got to this part yet in my head, let alone the rest of the car. So the dashboard's out, and we need to have all of our wires come through the firewall, and I'm gonna find a good little place to mount the ECU or just have it run. I want it to be in the passenger side of things. That way it's just right there and out of the way. So yeah, now I gotta, I guess, decide where I want my wires to come through. All right, so this is gonna be hard to see, but I cut my hole here. It's about 1 3/4 inches. That's gonna allow all my wires to come through. I feel like this is a weird spot to do it, but with the heater in the way, this is like where your heater core is, and like your heating elements is right here, your blower motor and all that stuff. There's no room over underneath the driver's side, and in the middle, I can't get to it at all because of the engine. So I felt like this was probably the best place for it here. The instructions tell you to use a hole saw. So I did here because this is directly behind where the subframe is. So directly behind that hole, there's probably about 3.5 inches, then there's the subframe. And I feel like that's gonna help kind of like stop some of the stuff from coming in if there's water and whatnot, but I'm gonna seal that up really good with a grommet, and there should be no sound, noise, air, or water, anything like that coming through that hole. And you'll never see it either because it'll be covered by carpet and whatnot, and then the dashboard, you won't see that either. This is where the bottom of the dashboard is. It's basically just like right here underneath this tuck. You can see the light coming through here, just right underneath this little tuck here. So it'll be clean, and then I can also like kind of help manage the wires away from the headers as well. So have a quick conversation about fuel pressure. Now before, this is Holley's fuel pressure regulator. For my system, I need this. It's a return system, so it's a temporary setup, but fuel comes out of the feed tube, goes up through the fuel filter, goes all the way to the first fuel rail setup, goes through the fuel rail, goes over, goes to the other fuel rail, comes back out of this fitting, goes through here to the fuel pressure regulator. Now originally I had it going in here and out the side as well. I'd read somewhere on the internet, I think, that people were doing this, or maybe for a different application. I don't know where I got that idea from because I checked the instructions and they do not say to do that. You're supposed to use your return line down here, which I was under the impression you could just be like, ah, fuck it, you don't have to use that if you don't want to. But you do. You definitely need to do this for this setup. So it goes in here. This is your fuel pressure reader right here. Comes down, then goes back in the fuel tank. Before I'd have to prime and prime and prime and prime and prime and prime and prime to get this thing to start, where now it's one turn. So kick on the ECU and hit the starter right here. God, she's just she's running really rich right now, I think. So we'll stop running her. She also doesn't have any coolant in it, so I don't want her to fuck up. But that has been eating me away for weeks. But now we have fuel pressure. I need to drop the fuel pressure a little bit. I'm running like 70 PSI, so I need to not run it like that. I need to be around like 59 PSI for stock injectors and whatnot. And I also noticed that it sounds like it has a cam, but I'm really thinking that actually might just be a vacuum leak. I don't know. So that is where I'm gonna call it for the day on this. This is gonna be the end of this video. Believe it or not, this is, I got shit stuck to my shoe. Believe it or not, this is back after I got back from Vegas. So like, gave myself a couple of days to kind of recover and then crack back at it. And again, I have to shout out Keith. Thank you. You have saved my life once again. Between you and Alex, I don't know what to say. But I've been chasing this fuel pressure issue, like having zero fuel pressure with 0 leaks, fuel pumps running plenty, and it's just my own damn fault. Like, this is all new stuff to me. I'm all learning stuff. But the cool part is now that I can pocket that information and remember it forever. So where does that leave us? My next video is gonna be putting the rest of this thing back together. Kind of a lot going on for it. I got a full carbon fiber front end coming from Anvil Auto, and a hood, and a trunk lid, and mirrors. I got a lot of carbon fiber stuff. Man, that's a fucking, I cannot tell you how much of a load off my mind that is. That thing runs like a top, like mint now. Other than that, the wiring was incredibly simple. I kept looking through the ECU thinking that maybe there was an issue there, and there wasn't. It was my own damn fault. So yeah, anyway guys, end of the video here. Next video, put it all back together, maybe do a quick little test drive. This is me shifting from park to drive, because it's an automatic. Anyway.